This whole conversation should explain why I take the approach that I do within this community. So, what's your name there? Gannon Ward? You are grounding your arguments in philosophy, which I don't know if I should assume this, but what do you think about the Enlightenment? What do you think about associating the United States with the Enlightenment? Is that your grounding, or is it in Christian nationalism? If it is, this is going to be even more of a shock to you. But you see, the book I have here, I finally pulled out of storage. It's called The Man Who Lost America. It is a British perspective on the American Revolution focused on the political and military leadership. There are plenty more older and newer books, and it's built more and more interest over the past decade. I've seen it happen among scholars, and I think really among history nerds generally as well. But there's not really much of a crossover yet, and I'm not seeing the crossover with this community yet, but it needs to happen. Anyway, your willingness to defend the patriots, in a way, it's just, common sense. We are, told these stories from childhood. Of course we should look up to these people because our freedom now comes from them. But what kind of undermines this whole idea is if you actually look at British history, both during the Revolution and during the 1600s. The way we teach British history, if at all, in the States, it's the Tudors, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, with all Shakespeare and maybe some early colonization. And then it jumps to George III. And then it jumps to Churchill. And that framing leaves American exceptionalism alone. This is why I focus on American exceptionalism as the grounding for white supremacy, not the other way around. Because American exceptionalism takes, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution at face value. America is the only freedom land of human history ever. Or at least since Rome. Every other republic has failed. What's the Dutch Republic? What's the Venetian Republic? What's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth? What's Britain? But if you actually look at the way the British government worked, at least in this book, and this book was very foundational for me. I don't know about all of you, but you should definitely take a look at it. It covers the king. It covers the prime minister. It covers discussions in Parliament. The Parliament of George III was not the Parliament of Henry VIII or Elizabeth I. The 1600s was a very radical century in Britain. So it was Elizabeth I, she died, James I becomes king. He's trying to balance everything, and then Charles I becomes king, and he's like, no, I'm going to be an absolutist. That ultimately leads to civil war in Britain, featuring the Puritans. Yes, the same Puritans as in New England. So you've got almost 20 years of revolution, civil war, and dictatorship under Oliver Cromwell. Now, if you want to, are you familiar with the podcast Revolutions by Mike Duncan? He's great on the English Civil War. He's great on the French Revolution onward. He has a season on the American Revolution. It's his worst one because he just parrots the patriot myth. He takes the founders at face value, even as he covers the British 1600s. And I know why he does this, because he skips the Glorious Revolution of 1688. I asked him. He says, 1688 doesn't matter. I'm guessing 1688 doesn't matter to you either. Otherwise, you would have mentioned it. Instead of going random philosophy, which is, by the way, the exact model of the 1776 Commission of Task Force 250. of the president's executive orders of what the Patriot myth is, both in most schools, including in AP programs, even in undergraduate and even graduate programs, even in your local bookstore's history section. But I found this book, and I found plenty of others, in that same bookstore history section. And they offer a challenge to that myth, which is, it is forever assumed in the Patriot myth, in all of its forms, that Britain was basically an absolutist state. Or if it was democratic in any way, it was deeply, deeply corrupt. And so, by creating a state that is not corrupt, that is a city on a hill, that is the epitome of the Enlightenment, so covering both sides there, that justifies the slavery. That justifies the native genocide. What are some slaves? What are some natives if you're building a new world? But what if that's a lie? What if that is a self-serving lie? We certainly view that with other states. We might do that with, say, the Jacobins, the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks and the Russian Revolution, and other states all over the world. We should apply that same standard to our country. And that is why the Patriot myth isn't valid. If you're looking at pure philosophical justifications, I don't think that's useful. Sorry, I'm a hardline realist, a hardline materialist. Philosophy it doesn't matter. You can say whatever honey words you want. But states run by power and legitimacy. They use their philosophy to gain legitimacy. That's what the Declaration of Independence is. That's what the Constitution is. And just rip off that Band-Aid, because it'll make things so much easier and make things make so much more sense. All countries are bad, including ours. That resolves the cognitive dissonance that I am sure you're struggling with. There is no good guy country. All countries have blood on their hands by their very nature. And so, if you challenge the core assumption of the society in which you live that you wouldn't even think of criticizing, people criticize the founders for slavery and native genocide, but they still, even progressives and liberals, take their claims of British tyranny at face value. That is, I think, what needs to be questioned the most, because so few people are willing to do it. And I think this book is the great place to start. So, Mr. Gannon, I am imploring you to look at history beyond philosophy. There are only so many philosophers out there, and philosophers can be twisted in an infinite number of ways. But what is much harder to twist is how governments and militaries actually work, how they act upon people, both the highfalutin guys in their plantations or castles, and their slaves, serfs, peasants, and workers, and everyone in between, including other nations.